Owning a mall sounds like the cleanest kind of wealth. Buy a giant building, collect rent, repeat. But behind that simple picture is one of the most fragile businesses in real estate, and the part that looks strongest from outside is often the first thing to fool you. Before a mall earns a dollar, someone has to carry land costs, construction risk, taxes, utilities, security, repairs, and usually a mountain of financing. So this is not a story about easy rent. It is a story about scale, timing, and a very expensive bet on human behavior. To understand the economics of owning a shopping mall, you have to stop seeing a building and start seeing a chain reaction. By the end of this, the mall won't look like a rental property at all. It will look like a living system held together by traffic, contracts, and trust. A mall owner is not just leasing boxes. They are coordinating parking, air systems, roofs, cleaning crews, loading schedules, signage, promotions, and dozens of separate businesses under one controlled environment. It behaves less like a passive asset and more like a private indoor district. There are two broad ways into the business: build a mall or buy one that already exists. Building gives more control, but far more upfront uncertainty. Buying looks safer until you discover the previous owner may also be handing you outdated layouts, deferred repairs, and aging tenant relationships. One of the strangest things about malls is how little square footage tells you by itself. Two properties can look comparable on a site map and still live in completely different financial universes. In this business, the spread between desirable and distressed can be enormous. Why does one mall command attention while another struggles to survive? Because buyers are not really paying for walls and parking lots. They are paying for the local machine around the building: incomes, habits, traffic flows, nearby competition, and the probability that people keep showing up next year. Local demographics are not background information. They are the operating fuel. A mall needs enough people nearby, enough spending power, enough convenience, and enough repeat reasons to visit. If those inputs soften, the property doesn't just make less money. Its entire future becomes harder to underwrite. A mall also competes on radius. How far will people drive? What else sits along the route? Is there a newer center closer to home, a lifestyle district with restaurants, or simply a phone screen that solves the same need faster? The answers shape rent more than the architecture does. So from day one, owning a mall is a wager on the future, not a claim on guaranteed rent. You are betting that the area keeps earning, people keep arriving, merchants keep selling, and the building stays useful enough to justify all the money trapped inside it. Buying a mall usually means assembling a capital stack before you ever worry about shoppers. There is equity, debt, legal review, environmental review, lease analysis, and engineering work. The building may feel physical, but the transaction is really a dense web of assumptions about cash flow and risk. Even when the space looks clean and consumer-friendly, a mall is mechanically intense. It needs circulation, fire systems, elevators, escalators, utility capacity, roof strength, back-of-house corridors, and loading access. All of that costs real money to build, and all of it ages whether customer demand grows or not. Then there is the stuff viewers rarely imagine when they picture rent collection: parking lot resurfacing, exterior lighting, roof repairs, snow removal, air conditioning, elevators, landscaping, and emergency systems. A mall can look full and still be quietly bleeding cash through the infrastructure that keeps it usable. A mall is also tangled up with local government. Property taxes, zoning, access roads, public safety standards, signage rules, and insurance requirements all shape the economics. That matters because the owner cannot simply wish costs away when sales slow. The property remains expensive to hold every month. That is one reason malls are often owned through REITs, or real estate investment trusts. In simple terms, a REIT lets a company pool investor capital around income-producing property, then manage those large assets within one structure, rather than leaving the risk concentrated in a single owner. REIT structures can help with scale. They allow owners to raise capital, spread exposure across properties, and finance upgrades that would overwhelm a smaller operator. But that doesn't make mall risk disappear. It just means the risk is organized, packaged, and watched at a larger corporate level. Public ownership does not rescue a bad location. A REIT can diversify some financial risk, but each mall still depends on its own trade area, tenant mix, and community relevance. A spreadsheet can smooth the portfolio. It cannot make the wrong building necessary to the people around it. Now we get to the part most people oversimplify. A mall does not usually live on one type of rent. It operates through layers: base rent, extra rent, reimbursements, temporary tenants, signage, parking income, entertainment deals, and sometimes revenue tied directly to store performance. Inline tenants, the smaller shops lining the corridors, often carry surprisingly important economics. They usually rent high-visibility space in the part of the property where customer traffic is meant to flow. In other words, they are not just paying for square footage, they are paying for position. Then you have kiosks and pop-ups. These are smaller, more flexible deals that can fill gaps, animate corridors, and squeeze income out of underused space. They may not define the whole property, but they can help owners keep a mall visually active while testing what shoppers still respond to. Some leases add another twist: percentage rent. That means once a store's sales move past an agreed threshold, the landlord shares in some of the upside. This matters because the owner is no longer just collecting fixed occupancy income. They are directly tied to whether the environment helps merchants sell. Malls also recover part of their operating costs through common area maintenance charges. Hallways, lights, restrooms, security, cleaning, landscaping, and other shared spaces cost money every day, so the owner often passes some of that burden through to tenants instead of absorbing it entirely. Visibility can be monetized too. Exterior signs, indoor screens, promotional displays, seasonal sponsorships, and naming opportunities can all produce income. None of those streams replaces rent on its own, but together they remind you that mall ownership is really a business of packaging attention and access. Even the smaller lines can matter. Parking arrangements, vending, ATMs, storage agreements, lockers, or temporary event fees. In a boom, these look marginal. In a tougher environment, they become part of the difference between a property that can still adapt and one that runs out of flexibility. Food courts do more than sell lunch. They increase dwell time, create repeat visits, and keep customers circulating instead of leaving after one purchase. That makes dining economics especially interesting in malls, because the value of a meal may include the extra time and extra spending it generates elsewhere. Entertainment tenants often work the same way. A cinema, family attraction, or similar use may not maximize rent per square foot in the narrowest sense. But if it extends visits and keeps the property relevant after traditional shopping hours, it can strengthen the whole ecosystem around it. This brings us to the most important relationship in the building: the anchor tenant. Anchors are the large stores or major draws placed to attract consistent foot traffic. Their role is bigger than their lease. They help create the conditions that make smaller tenants willing to pay for the surrounding space. That is why anchors often do not pay rent on the same terms as the smaller stores around them. The owner is making a trade. Instead of charging the maximum possible rent to the biggest box, they accept that its real contribution may be the shoppers it delivers to everyone else. Put differently, the mall owner is not just selling floor space, they are selling adjacency to movement. If the anchor can reliably pull people into the building, the nearby stores become more valuable. If that movement weakens, the pricing logic of the smaller leases starts to wobble. Good mall leasing is not just filling every box, it is composing a tenant mix where categories reinforce each other. The right restaurant can support the right cinema. The right daily use store can support the right apparel corridor. A mall becomes stronger when the pieces create repeat patterns together. This is why high occupancy can be misleading. A mall can look full while relying on weak tenants, temporary deals, rent concessions, or underperforming traffic patterns. Occupancy tells you how many spaces are leased. It does not tell you whether the leasing structure is durable, profitable, or safe. At the center of the model is a simple idea: foot traffic is the product. Stores care about who passes by, how often they return, how long they stay, and what mood they are in while moving. The architecture exists to shape that product into something monetizable. One common layout puts major draws at different ends of the property, then stretches smaller stores between them. That design is elegant for one reason: it turns movement into exposure. If shoppers want both ends of the mall, they naturally create value for the middle. Malls also reduce friction. Storefronts open toward the interior. Lighting pulls attention inward, and movement between walkway and shop can feel almost seamless. The goal is not mystery, it is momentum. Every tiny reduction in resistance increases the chance that browsing turns into spending. Vertical circulation matters too. An escalator does more than move people upstairs. It keeps them visually connected to surrounding stores while they move, which can create extra moments of discovery. In mall economics, even the path between floors is expected to contribute to tenant value. Owners also think about adjacency by customer type. Grouping related stores can help shoppers compare, browse longer, and make multi-stop trips. Done well, that increases the odds that one visit turns into several purchases. Done badly, it just concentrates weakness in one part of the building. This is not guesswork alone. Professional owners track counts, sales productivity, corridor strength, dwell time, and traffic peaks. Those numbers influence what kind of tenant belongs in a space and how much that space can command. The mall is constantly measuring whether movement still translates into economics. A healthy mall usually needs more than occupied boxes. It needs stores that can actually trade. If tenant sales weaken, rent pressure follows. So sophisticated owners watch productivity, not just occupancy, because sales softness often appears before visible vacancy spreads through the corridors. Malls are unusually sensitive to dead zones. If one wing loses energy, shoppers do not always spread out evenly. They often avoid the weak area, which reduces exposure for nearby tenants and makes the emptiness feel larger than it is. In a mall, inactivity has a way of broadcasting itself. When an anchor leaves, the damage is not only legal or financial, it is psychological. People sense a missing reason to walk that direction. That shift can happen before every lease is renegotiated, before every vacancy appears, and before the owner has any elegant way to patch the hole. Vacancy sends a message. Even when the rest of the building is still operating, empty storefronts can tell shoppers the center is slipping. That matters because malls depend partly on confidence. Once people start expecting decline, they adjust their routines, and routines are hard to win back. That is the deeper business. A mall becomes valuable when it earns a place in local habit loops, not just shopping, but routines, meeting friends, grabbing food, solving errands, spending time. When a property falls out of those loops, it becomes much harder for rent, design, or nostalgia to save it. Here is where mall ownership gets unforgiving. Even if traffic softens gradually, the cost structure rarely relaxes with it. The building still needs to be lit, cooled, cleaned, insured, protected, and financed. So a modest revenue drop can matter much more than it would in a simpler property type. Debt makes that pressure sharper. A lender expects scheduled payments, and those payments do not wait for a tenant remix or a better holiday season. If mall income weakens enough, the problem stops being retail strategy alone. It becomes a timing problem between shrinking cash flow and fixed obligations. Refinancing can add another layer of risk. A mall that looked acceptable under one market environment may look much weaker under another. If buyers, lenders, or appraisers grow more cautious, the owner may discover the building is worth less, borrow less, and demand more capital than expected. Capital expenditures are another hidden stress point. Roofs do not care about retail sentiment. Pavement does not wait for better leasing conditions. Mechanical systems do not accept optimism as payment. If an owner delays too much maintenance, the property can suddenly face a backlog that is expensive, visible, and hard to finance. Malls also require active management and labor. Security, cleaning, repairs, operations, tenant coordination, and event support all take people. That means mall ownership is never just about the asset. It is also about sustaining a service environment that customers barely notice when it works well. Replacing a tenant can cost money too. Owners may offer improvement allowances, free rent periods, or brokerage commissions to get a deal done. So vacancy is not merely a temporary absence of income. It can trigger a new round of spending before the next tenant contributes anything meaningful. Because malls are heavily public spaces, liability and insurance matter constantly. Large crowds, weather exposure, mechanical systems, food uses, parking lots, and event programming all widen the operating risk. Again, none of this is glamorous, but these hidden obligations are part of what ownership really means. Now we reach the legal mechanism that makes mall fragility so dramatic: co-tenancy. A co-tenancy clause can allow a tenant to reduce rent, go dark, or sometimes exit if a key anchor leaves or if occupancy falls below agreed levels. This is where one vacancy stops being one vacancy. The logic is straightforward.
Smaller tenants agreed to lease space partly because a major draw would keep customer traffic flowing. If that draw disappears, the smaller tenant argues the deal has changed. From their perspective, they are no longer receiving the environment they originally priced into the lease. Once triggered, those remedies can seriously hurt the owner. A tenant may pay less rent, they may remain open with limited effort, in some cases they may leave entirely. So the legal consequences of losing one big tenant can multiply across several smaller leases at once. This is the domino effect mall owners fear. One anchor closes, traffic weakens, smaller tenants invoke protections, rent falls, more space feels less valuable, more shoppers drift away. The building can move from manageable stress to systemic instability without any single dramatic event on its own. And because lenders watch net operating income, a rent shock does not stay inside leasing. Lower income can affect covenant compliance, refinancing options, and perceived collateral quality. That is why mall distress often feels nonlinear. The legal, operating, and financing layers can all start reinforcing one another. When that happens, the building's value can drop faster than many people expect. Not because the concrete vanished, but because the future cash flow attached to that concrete looks less reliable. In commercial real estate, value is ultimately a story about expected usefulness, not physical permanence.
That is why mall ownership is so different from the fantasy of being a landlord with many separate tenants. The tenants are connected to each other. The traffic patterns are connected. The financing assumptions are connected. Under stress, what looked diversified can behave like one tightly linked organism. The important point is not that every mall is doomed. It is that mall economics are highly interdependent. Strength comes from a stable network of reasons to visit and reasons to lease. Weakness appears when too many of those reasons quietly depend on the same few supports. To see how these forces play out in real life, consider Rolling Acres Mall in Akron, Ohio. It opened in 1975 and for years represented the kind of regional shopping center that felt deeply woven into local life. On paper, it once looked like a success story. At opening, the logic was clear. A growing suburban trade area, a modern enclosed format, major tenants, and lots of consumer energy could make a regional mall feel almost inevitable. That confidence matters because distressed properties often begin as assets that once fit their market very well. At its height, Rolling Acres was large, more than 150 stores, 5 anchors, and about 1.3 million square feet. That scale is important. Big malls do not fade because they were always irrelevant. They become cautionary because they were once central enough to feel durable. For a while, the center worked because the community logic worked. People drove there, met there, bought there, and repeated the pattern. The mall was not merely a place to transact, it was a local node of routine and identity, which is exactly what gives enclosed retail real staying power in the first place. But mall decline usually begins in the surrounding landscape. Newer retail options emerge, consumer patterns shift, the region changes. The original center may still be standing, still recognizable, still full of memory, while the market around it slowly stops choosing it first. That matters even more when the mall relies on large department store anchors whose own business models are weakening. Once those chains struggle nationally, the local mall inherits a second layer of risk. It is no longer just betting on neighborhood demand. It is betting on distant corporate decisions too. One of the hardest things about mall decline is that foot traffic can weaken before occupancy makes the danger obvious. The center may still look operational, but the rhythm changes first. Fewer casual trips, fewer secondary purchases, less energy in the corridors. Economically, that can be the beginning of the story. For a time, a mall can keep up appearances. Temporary tenants, promotions, seasonal bursts, or the simple fact that the shell still feels familiar can make decline look slower than it really is. But the underlying question remains the same. Are people choosing this place for compelling reasons or out of habit that is fading? As gaps appear, the center stops feeling seamless. That matters because malls are built around continuity. A vacant stretch does more than remove rent. It interrupts momentum, weakens adjacent visibility, and makes the whole experience feel less rewarding. The financial problem and the customer problem start becoming the same problem. Once enough variety disappears, customers begin changing their behavior more aggressively. A shorter visit means fewer chances to browse. Fewer reasons to browse means fewer secondary sales. That hurts the tenants still trying to hold on, which makes the leasing story even harder for the owner to stabilize. Rolling Acres did not vanish in one cinematic moment. The interior closed in 2008, yet a few anchor-related pieces lingered afterward. That staggered ending is common in distressed retail. The mall as a shared environment can fail first, while isolated boxes or remnants continue briefly on separate logic. By the end, the property was no longer a weakening mall. It was an empty shell without a convincing use strong enough to pull the economics back together. Once that happens, nostalgia is not a business model. The building has to justify its existence in a new way, or lose it. The site was eventually demolished, and the land moved on to a different purpose. That ending is important. Real estate value does not come from sentiment or sheer size. It comes from the most convincing.
So, what separates the malls that survive from the ones that hollow out? Usually, it is the ability to become useful in a broader way. The winning question is no longer, how do we lease more stores? It is, why should people keep coming here in person at all? Services are one major answer. Gyms, medical clinics, education uses, and other in-person needs can create recurring traffic that e-commerce cannot fully duplicate. That matters because a service-driven visitor may still buy coffee, grab lunch, or solve another errand while already on site. Another strategy is to reduce dependence on occasional shopping trips by adding apartments, offices, or hotels. Mixed-use development changes the economics because the site starts generating its own built-in customers. Instead of waiting for traffic to arrive from outside, the property partially manufactures demand on location. Experience is another form of defense. Events, social spaces, food, play, and community programming can transform a property from a place that sells products into a place that hosts time. That shift matters because time spent together is harder for digital convenience to erase than commodity shopping alone. Some of the strongest repositioning ideas are not flashy at all. Daily need anchors like groceries, practical services, and family routines can be more resilient than aspirational retail. Frequency matters. A center that solves ordinary life consistently may outperform one that depends only on occasional destination shopping.
In some markets, the enclosed format itself becomes the problem. Owners respond by opening the site up, breaking large boxes apart, and creating a more street-like environment. The core idea is the same: match the physical form of the property to how people actually want to spend time now. The best adaptations are local, not generic. They start with a hard question. What does this community actually lack, value, and revisit? Owners who answer that honestly can redesign around real demand. Owners who cling to the old story may keep funding a version of the property people have already outgrown. That is the modern survival path. The property becomes a platform for overlapping reasons to show up in person, not just buying goods, but solving needs, spending time, staying healthy, meeting people, and enjoying convenience that works best offline. The building survives by becoming more useful than its original category. Of course, reinvention is not easy. It can require demolition, rezoning, new infrastructure, new financing, and years of patient execution. So adaptation is not a magical escape hatch. It is another serious capital decision, and it only works when the new concept is more credible than the old one. And not every mall can be saved equally well. Some sites sit in strong locations with multiple plausible second lives. Others do not. That is why the endgame varies so much. The future of a mall depends less on what it used to be and more on what else the land can convincingly become.
So the mall story is not simply rise or collapse, it is selection. Some properties evolve into useful new community infrastructure, some shrink into narrower roles, some disappear. The result depends on whether the site can still earn repeated human attention in a way that justifies all the capital tied to it. If there is one principle underneath all of this, it is that a property's value depends on its usefulness to specific people in a specific place. Square footage matters, construction quality matters, but neither matters as much as whether the community still has strong reasons to return. A giant building is not automatically a valuable one. If the surrounding community no longer needs what the structure was built to do, size becomes a burden. In real estate, useless square footage is not hidden wealth. It is maintenance,
taxes, and a very expensive unanswered question. Digital convenience changed the old equation. Once people could compare prices, order basics, and solve simple shopping needs from home, the mall lost its automatic advantage. That forced physical retail to compete on something harder to copy: immediacy, experience, trust, service, and time well spent. So the mall owner's real business is not collecting rent from boxes. It is orchestrating demand inside a place. The owners who understand that design for movement, tenant fit, repeat visits, and emotional comfort. The owners who miss it can mistake occupancy for strength until the system buckles.